Hi biologists, let's start by looking at the learning objectives for this lesson. At the end of this section and following the biology syllabus, you should be able to define and give examples of the term osmosis. What does this actually mean? What are we trying to learn? Well, it's very straightforward. You have to be able to give the definition of osmosis and be able to give examples. Before we can understand osmosis, let's revise or get up to speed on diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of chemicals from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. From a region of where there are a lot of these chemicals to a region of where there are less. We come down from a high, so the chemicals, for those of you able for a bit more, are moving down the concentration gradient. Diffusion is passive. This means it does not require energy. It can happen by itself. Let's try to get the idea a little bit better. Imagine that I open a bottle of perfume. As we all know, the scent will travel through the room and eventually the person at the back will get to smell it. The chemicals are moving from an area of high concentration. Let's go back for a quick look at our definition. The chemicals move from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. So the chemicals will move from a region of high concentration from the bottle when it is opened to a region of low concentration through the air until eventually the person at the end of the room will smell it. Get the idea? Now that we understand diffusion, let's look at the definition of osmosis. A little heads up here. Make sure that you learn it. Osmosis is the movement of water from a region of high water concentration to a region of low water concentration. First of all, that should be ringing a bell as we come down from a high. For those of you able for a bit more, we come down the concentration gradient. We are moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. What we need to notice here, though, is that we are talking about the movement of water. Now, this is a vital point. We must always include the word water in our definition. So, osmosis is the movement of water from a region of high water concentration to a region of low water concentration across a semi-permeable membrane. Osmosis, like diffusion, is passive. It does not require energy. Let's try and get the idea a little bit better. We're all familiar with the idea of having weak coffee or strong coffee. If I have weak coffee, there isn't much coffee and it is very watery. It doesn't matter whether I have a few drops of it, half a cup of it, a mug of it, a bucket of it, it is still weak coffee. From a science point of view, it is a solution with high water concentration. Now don't forget, it doesn't matter how much coffee I have, a couple of drops, half a cup, it is still high water concentration. For those of you able for a bit more, it's a dilute solution or a hypotonic solution. But we're not going to worry about that here. We're all going to focus on the idea of the water concentration. This is a vital concept for the understanding of osmosis. We're all familiar with strong coffee. So whether I have a few drops of strong coffee, whether I have half a cup of strong coffee, whether I have a bucket of strong coffee, I still have strong coffee. The concentration of water is low. We have to get this idea first. Those able for a bit more, I'd have a concentrated solution or a hypertonic solution. Like I've said, we're going to focus on the water concentration. Now let's get the next idea. Let's suppose I separate a high water concentration solution from a low water concentration solution by means of a semi-permeable membrane, something like a sieve which has pores in it to allow the movement of the water. Well, what will happen here, as you've guessed, that the water will move from a region of high water concentration to a region of low water concentration across the semi-permeable membrane. Now you should be able to get the idea that osmosis is the movement of water from a region of high water concentration to a region of low water concentration across a semi-permeable membrane. Let's have a look at some examples of osmosis. Specifically, an example of osmosis in an animal cell, that is, in a red blood cell, and an example of osmosis in a plant cell. Let's get this idea. Let's suppose we have an animal cell, like a red blood cell, in distilled water. Now, distilled water is pure water with absolutely nothing dissolved in it. So it is 100% water. Recall that cytoplasm consists of 90% water. So now, think about it. What's going to happen here? Well, as we've just learned, water is going to move from a high concentration of water. In fairness, if it was an exam, you can't get anything higher than 100%. So the water will move from a high water concentration across the semi-permeable membrane to a low water concentration. As a result, the red blood cell will swell up and burst. This is a hemolyzed red blood cell. Now let's have a look at the other situation, where you might have an animal cell in a salt solution. This time, find the high water concentration. The high water concentration will be inside the red blood cell because the cytoplasm is 90% water, a pretty high mark in an exam, pretty high water concentration. Outside is a salty area, so the water concentration outside will be low. So what will happen? Figure it out. The water will move from a region of high water concentration inside to a region of low water concentration outside across the semi-permeable membrane. The red blood cell will shrink and shrivel up. Then you will have what we call a crenated red blood cell. So, in summary, what happens to the red blood cell? Well, if the cell is placed in distilled water, water will enter by osmosis, moving from a high water concentration to a low water concentration inside, and the cell will swell and burst. If the cell is placed in a concentrated salt or sugar solution, the water will move from a high concentration of water inside to a low water concentration outside across the semi-permeable membrane, and the cell will shrink and shrivel. Let's get the idea in a plant cell. If you have a plant cell in distilled water, think about it again. What do we need to have here? We need to have a difference in water concentrations. The concentration of the water outside is pure water. It is 100%. You can't get any higher water concentration than that. So what will happen here? The water will move from a region of high water concentration outside to a region of low water concentration inside across the semi-permeable membrane. The vacuole will swell up, expanding, and so too will the cytoplasm, and will push up, exerting a pressure and push up against the cell wall. It will not actually burst due to the strength of the cell wall. The plant cell will then be turgid. What will happen if the plant cell is in a salt solution? Well, what do we need to have here again? We need to have a difference in water concentrations. This time, the water concentration is 90% inside because cytoplasm is 90% water. So the water will move from a region of high water concentration inside to a region of lower water concentration outside across the semi-permeable membrane. So the water will move out of the vacuole, which will shrivel up, hence the cytoplasm will shrivel up, and the cell membrane will move away from the cell wall. It will no longer be exerting a pressure on the cell wall. The cell is then said to be plasmolyzed or to be flaccid. In other words, it's rather wilted or weak. So in summary, if a plant cell is placed in distilled water, the water will enter from a high water concentration outside to a low water concentration inside. The vacuole will swell up and the cell membrane will press up against the cell wall, and the result will be a turgid cell. If the cell is placed in a concentrated salt solution, then the water will leave by osmosis, the vacuole will shrink, the cell membrane will move away from the cell wall, and you will have a plasmolyzed or flaccid cell. At this point, we should have realized that osmosis and diffusion are very closely related. Osmosis is a form of diffusion because it involves the movement of chemicals from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. Recall, we come down from a high. It's like diffusion because it is a passive process. Osmosis is actually a special case of diffusion because it involves the movement of water and it involves the semi-permeable membrane. There you have it. Make sure you learn your definition word perfect. Practice in a jotter. Now that we've reached the end of our lesson, have we achieved our objective? Can you define and give examples of the term osmosis?